When I was 19 years old, I was awoken in the middle of the night by the sounds of a car driving over a curb and onto a pathway. What followed was a loud bang as the vehicle collided with somebody before crashing into a fence. By the time I had gathered my bearings and made my way to the window, the car had pulled out and the driver had fled. All I could see was the man lying on the floor, screaming in agonizing pain with his body twisted and broken in the middle of the road. This was 2009, and yet I can still hear the blood-curdling screams that echo through my mind with such clarity, that twisted my insides with such intensity. That event changed my outlook in more ways than I ever realized, forever more aware of the horrors that can suddenly appear in our lives. You see, it was clear to me that whoever had hit this man was aiming for him. This realization of horrors was made all the worse when news spread across my sleepy town that a man whom I, myself, had an altercation with earlier on that year had been arrested. This young man was charged with the heinous act of cutting off his own mother's hands. Although we do not think about it, we are all aware of how close we are to the darkness at any point in our lives. We have no idea what is occurring down that dark alley we walk by or behind the thick curtains of the houses on our road. And so, we continue our lives, pushing the darkness out of our minds. To dwell on these dark anxieties for too long is no way to live. But what if, one morning, you woke up to find that darkness had arrived within the walls of your own bedroom? My name is Luke Mordew, and this urban legend is Aren't You Glad You Didn't Turn On the Lights? As another of the more famous urban legends, this one remains somewhat chameleon-like, with its ability to morph into several iterations with enough vigor that each one could stand as its own chapter. Most of us have heard of at least two of these versions, and many of us probably do not even realize they are the same tale told in two different ways. This is one of the many reasons it has stood the test of time for so long. The element of this story that seems to cause that shiver up your spine whenever it is told is not just the notion of just how close the protagonist is to the horrific crime, but also how close she was to falling victim to it herself. This begs the question that if she acted differently, if her movements were ever so slightly changed, what outcomes could have possibly occurred? The tale of Aren't You Glad You Didn't Turn On the Lights brings forward a much smaller but well-known urban legend to my mind for reasons I will explain. This is the simple belief that you are never more than 6 feet from a rat in the city, usually the one you reside within. This belief has been retold across concrete jungles worldwide for more than 100 years. When I was told this, it was about the city I reside, London, although I have heard it being said for New York, Paris, and others worldwide. The one rat per person rule seems to have stemmed from a book released as far back as 1909, entitled The Rat Problem by W.E. Bolter. In reality, studies by Dr. David Cohen, science leader at Sandhutton's National Wildlife Management Centre, suggest that in most urban areas, in Britain at least, you are closer to 164 feet away from a rat at any given time. However, in the less funded areas of our country, this legend is believed to become a reality, as according to environmental health and housing consultant Dr. Stephen Battersby, drops to 10 to 15 feet in these areas. The comparison between this legend and the furry city dwellers beneath our feet may seem strange, but it is another example of our willingness to believe that there is something close by at all times that we do not see. This emphasizes just how aware we are of how little we know what is truly happening in the darkness around us. It is another tale playing on the fears of what goes on behind closed doors, or what darkness lurks right under our noses. There's only one thing worse than coming to a horrible realization, and that is knowing that you could have realized it so much sooner. In my telling of the story, we will be following Cecilia as she studies hard for her upcoming exam with her roommate Emily, both unaware of the darkness that is heading their way. Their room was filled with textbooks and scribbled pieces of paper. Notes were stacked neatly on top of Emily's bed that rested against a wall of the left-hand side of the room. Cecilia's notes were spread out, bordering on chaos as they covered the sheets on top of her bed on the opposite side of their small bedroom. Usually, they would study with their headphones in, each only lit by the warm light emitting from their bedside lamps, focusing on different subjects but keeping each other in check. Although this time was different than usual, this was the only exam that they both needed to sit in together. The first time their studying had crossed paths, so it only made sense that they would work together. It could not be said that they were friends. Not really. They rarely did anything together outside of their home, and at no point had they ever truly opened up about the troubles in their lives. But as we all do, they would still refer to each other as friends if asked. Close enough to enjoy each other's company, friendly enough to hang out, but distant enough that it never got complicated. It was not forced or planned to be this way. They simply just didn't seem to fit as people. Whilst they were taking turns asking each other questions, testing each other's knowledge, Emily could see the distraction in Cecilia's face as the ping of her phone echoed through the room like a game show buzzer. "Just go check it," Emily told her, slightly frustrated but still laughing under her breath. Cecilia did not fight, jumping to her feet and pacing across the room to her mobile phone that sat charging on her bedside table. She flicked it open and read the 3 different texts from her 3 separate friends, and her face dropped. "My friends are at a party, I totally forgot about it." Emily nodded her head, now unsure of whether the night was going to continue or if she was now going to have to spend the evening revising alone. But to her surprise, Cecilia replied to her text swiftly, her thumbs tapping away at the screen before flicking off the sound. She threw the phone onto her bed, trying to keep it out of sight and out of mind. "Right, come on, let's do this," Cecilia assertively said as she paced towards the desk to let Emily know that she was staying. So they continued to question each other and contemplated certain confusing elements of the course they were working on, but Emily could now see the distraction growing in Cecilia's eyes. With each quiet moment or slight pause, her eyes would subconsciously dart in the direction of her phone. "If you want to go, just go," she told her with a smile that she hoped would convey that she would not be offended by the choice to leave. Cecilia studied her face for a moment, a burst of excitement and worry seeping through her veins. "Come with me," she replied with a light bulb moment expression. "Nah, I've really got to revise, I'm struggling more than you," Emily replied with a sigh. "Just for a little bit." "Nah, I really can't." Cecilia didn't know whether she wanted her to come due to a newly found bond they were experiencing, or if it was just guilt. Not only the guilt of leaving her home to revise alone, but guilt in herself, her lack of self-control, of discipline. Perhaps it would have made her feel better knowing that she was not alone in her failed attempt to help herself long-term by staying in for a single night. Emily stuck to her guns though and continued to revise, as Cecilia darted around the room, throwing on a dress and applying her makeup as fast as she could, while simultaneously announcing to her friends through text that she would be there. She had slipped into her heels and done herself up to an acceptable standard, ready for the night. She stood by the bedroom door, looking in at Emily, who was already scribbling away in her notebook, focusing on the tasks at hand. Her phone pinged again, this time telling her the taxi was outside waiting. "Are you sure you don't want to come?" she asked, knowing it was already too late for her to jump into the taxi if she was going to get ready. "I'm sure, I'll see you in the morning. Just try not to wake me up when you get back, please," Emily replied with a soft smile. Cecilia nodded in agreement and slipped out of the house. When she got to the bottom of the stairs, she crept out of the front door and paced towards the taxi, greeting the driver as she flicked open the back door. But as she did, she paused for just a moment. On the other side of the road, standing between two streetlights, but distant enough from both to remain in the shadows, stood a man smoking a cigarette. She watched the slight amber glow of tobacco light up against the black silhouette ahead as he stared in her direction. Was he watching her? Was he watching the house? Perhaps he was just waiting for somebody or had stepped outside for a smoke. That must be it. At least, that's what she told herself as she slipped into the taxi and drove away towards her night of fun and laughter. Within the hour, Cecilia had done enough shots to catch up with her friends. She was telling jokes and stories in the back garden of the house party under the coloured fairy lights that glistened in the trees above. She had told her friends that she couldn't drink too much as she had an exam in the morning and could not be late. But as they all got swept up in the atmosphere of alcohol and games, this notion swiftly went out of the window, especially with how bad she was at beer pong. She could not quite put her finger on why it was, and she was far too drunk to consider it for too long. But she felt an urge to text her roommate and invite her to the party once more. This time, she wrote the address, adding, "No pressure, only if you want to." But almost at the speed it took her to write out the text, she received her response, one that said, "Thank you, kiss. I'll see you in the morning." That was the last time Cecilia thought about Emily that night. She had asked her to come several times, and there was no denying that it would not happen. And nobody could say she didn't try. In many ways, she respected Emily for sticking to what she needed to do and not giving in to the social pressures that even she had placed upon herself. But as her favourite song blasted from the living room, Cecilia slipped her phone back into her purse and threw her hands in the air with an excitable scream, ready to dance the night away. By 1 a.m, Cecilia's speedy drinking to catch up with her friends when she first arrived at the party, mixed with the several failed attempts at beer pong, resulted in her leaning over the toilet seat in the upstairs bathroom, heaving into the bowl. Her friends knocked on the door and asked if she was okay, to which she replied that she was fine, as she slumped down by the wall, taking a moment to gather her thoughts. She felt her phone buzz in her bag, but she ignored it, focusing on her breathing whilst her friends over-dramatized on the events, begging her to open the door. "I'm fine, seriously, relax," she called back, somewhat irritated by their overreaction to what was, by this point, a run-of-the-mill part of any night out drinking. Her friends told her that they would be downstairs and that they hoped that she was okay, whilst one reminded her that there was a queue growing outside on the landing. But as this was said, Cecilia's phone buzzed again. Through her blurred vision and warped perspective, she reached into her bag and pulled out her phone to see that Emily was texting her. The first message was blank. Nothing at all. The second was a few random characters that created no possible word in the English language or any language. She studied it for a moment as the bottom read, "Emily is typing." But it seems to go on forever. Maybe she's accidentally pushed a key, Cecilia thought to herself as she replied, "Is everything okay?" A couple of seconds later, the writing, "Emily is typing," disappeared, now replaced with, "Emily is recording a message." Whilst she waited, Cecilia got to her feet. She flushed the toilet and washed her mouth with the water from the bathroom sink, staring at herself in the mirror to try and gauge just how drunk she was. The phone buzzed again, louder as it rumbled against the porcelain of the white goods. She opened it to find a 10-second-long voice note from Emily's phone. So she clicked play, lifting the phone to her ear to ensure it was heard clearly. All that played were scuffles and groans, rubbing against fabric, banging against something hard, until it finally cut out to silence once again. Cecilia thought for a moment about what the hell was going on. However, she quickly realised that Emily must have not locked her phone before putting it back into her pocket, and she was now accidentally messaging and voice noting the most recent person she had texted. She laughed and stepped out of the bathroom to find the long queue of frustrated faces waiting for her to stop potting around inside. She stumbled to the bottom of the stairs where her friends were gathering their items, waiting for her to come down so they could tell her they were going to go home, as they too needed to get up the next day. They invited Cecilia to jump in the taxi so they could all share the cost between them, as she too now wanted to leave. It wasn't a long journey home, as Cecilia was the first house on the stop-off points, and she was back walking through her front door, waving her friends off as they disappeared into the distance within 10 minutes of leaving the party. She clicked the front door closed and crept up the long, dark corridor towards the stairs leading to the shared bedroom. She had seen that the lights outside were switched off and that Emily was already tucked away in bed, and so she crept up the stairs as quietly as possible, flicking on the torch of her phone instead of turning on any lights. When she got to the bedroom door, she listened carefully, ensuring that Emily was, in fact, asleep, before pulling down on the creaky handle and pushing it open as she stepped inside into the darkness. She avoided shining the light of her phone torch in the direction of Emily to ensure it did not disturb her as she slowly pushed the bedroom door closed. She slipped off her shoes and dress, leaving them on the floor as she tiptoed across the room as quietly as she could, focusing with all of her might to keep herself upright as the world spun around in her drunken state. Unfortunately, it seemed tiptoeing in the dark whilst drunk was actually causing more problems as she slightly stumbled into her bedside table, causing a slam to fill the silence. "Sorry," she whispered as she heard Emily's bed creak from movement. With the guilt of letting herself down, giving in to social pressure, leaving Emily to revise alone, and bailing on their plans, the last thing she wanted to do was to add waking her up to the list. So she set the alarm on her phone for 8 a.m., flicked off the torch, and slipped into her bed to sleep. The following morning, Cecilia woke up with her head heavy and throbbing. Her mouth was dry, with a horrible taste left behind. She looked up at the sun that peered brightly through the top of the curtains, shining down on her eyes in a beam of light. For a moment, she enjoyed laying in the bed, embracing the comfort of the pillow, before a sudden thought came to her. She had woken up in this bed many times, and the sun only peered through onto her eyes when it got nearer to midday, when the sun had risen further into the sky. A burst of panic exploded out of her as she shot up, her hand slamming down to her phone as she grabbed it. To her horror, it was dead, and the alarm had been missed. She screamed as she jumped out of bed, darting out of the bedroom in a panic. On the landing, she saw the clock on the wall read 10:35. The exam was to be sat in 25 minutes. "Emily, our alarms didn't go off," she screamed as she pushed open the bedroom door with force before diving into the bathroom to brush her teeth, whilst simultaneously putting her hair up in an easy ponytail. She stepped onto the landing, jumping into a pair of jeans she had grabbed from the top of the washing basket, whilst watching Emily lying asleep in her bed. "Emily, seriously, get up!" she shouted in frustration, throwing a dirty t-shirt at her before slipping a top over her head. She had no time to get anything from her hangers, but when her head popped through the neck of the top, she grew somewhat concerned and slightly confused as she noticed Emily had still not moved. "Emily," she said, this time with more concern and dread in her voice as she slowly edged to enter her bedroom once again. But as she stepped inside, pushing the door open fully, words that had been scrawled in blood across the wall above her flatmate's bed came into view. She swiftly dove forward, pulling the bedsheets from Emily, causing the dirty t-shirt to fly across the room as the mutilated corpse of her roommate lay dead in the pool of blood that dripped through the mattress. Cecilia stumbled back, slamming into her bedside table once more, desperately picking up her phone to call the police, forgetting that it was not charged. She ran past the body, keeping as far away as she could as she exited the room, pacing down the stairs and into the road outside, screaming for help, leaving her friend behind once again. This time, under the bloodied words written across the wall that read, "Aren't you glad you didn't turn on the lights?" Aren't You Glad You Didn't Turn On the Lights, is a close relative of the roommate's death. This tale appeared in folklorist Jan Harold Brunvan's book, The Vanishing Hitchhiker, in 1981. This, and the story known as Humans Can Lick Too, always involves the murder of somebody right before a protagonist is blinded by the darkness. The victim's mutilated body is often not discovered until much later, usually revealed by the light of day the following morning. The iterations vary, from the often female protagonist believing the sounds are her roommate messing around or having sex in the other bed. But in iterations where the crime is happening in another room, the victim is usually trying to get inside for help, but the protagonist remains still, believing someone is trying to get to her to cause harm. Proving itself to go further back than any of us could have imagined, the first iteration of this urban legend goes back to 19th century England on the 11th of August, 1871. It was here that a diary entry by Dermond Birchall read, "One of the guests told of a clergyman who was aroused in the middle of the night by his wife, who said, 'John dear, I am sure there is a robber under the bed. I hear him moving. Do get up and see.' John replied, 'Oh, it's only the Newfoundland dog. I just put my hand out and he licked it.' Next morning, all the jewellery and many other effects had disappeared." In 1919, a version appeared again in a tale called The Diary of Mr. Pointer by British author M.R. James, telling the story of a man engrossed in an ancient account of a student's death. He leans down to absently pet his dog, oblivious of the true nature of the creature crouching beside him. It seems the anxieties we live with have remained a part of our lives for as long as civilization itself. To lay in your bed and slumber is where your guard is truly let down. It is, in many ways, where you are most vulnerable. For a story to come out of the woodwork that confirms that fear is, of course, going to ignite the imaginations and nervous excitements of those who hear the tale. When a violent crime happens in our town or part of the city, there is always a strange, twisting sensation inside of our stomachs where we consider ourselves both lucky and suddenly aware of our exposure to horrific crimes. Throughout our everyday lives, we convince ourselves we are safe and comfortable, and we live by this until the day something rocks our belief and perception, unveiling that fear that sits inside of us. Bobby Duffy, Rhonda Wake, Tamara Burrows, and Pamela Bremner of the Global Market Research and Public Opinion Specialists conducted an intensive study that found that in the UK, 55% of British people consider crime and violence as one of the most worrying issues in life for them. This is one of the highest levels of concern that they have ever recorded for any single issue. It was even 20 percentage points higher than the next most crucial issue listed. It seems that those in Britain consider crime and violence a higher priority for the British public than many other European countries and the USA. This, surprisingly, has been a consistent theme since as far back as 1997. There is a darkness on every street. There is a wonder that asks if you have ever met and spoken to a murderer that has never been caught. At the very least, there is a high chance you have passed one in the street. And if you have never considered this, I imagine you might the next time you're walking down a busy road, watching the blur of faces that pass you by, full of light and dark in ways that we will never honestly know. With the focus on the horrifying aspects of it, we cannot forget the other elements, those of guilt and frustration that is built up alongside it. For a long time, I struggled to forgive myself for not acting faster when I woke up to find that man lying on the road that I mentioned at the beginning of this chapter. I was a teenager, drunk and half awake, and yet the fact it took me 30 seconds to get up and another 30 seconds to jump into action, only to find that several others had already run to his aid, plagued my mind for many years and changed how quickly I reacted to events for the rest of my life. The notion of a murder occurring in the same room as you, or even in the room next to you whilst you lay in a peaceful slumber, is enough to make any individual lose sleep. This makes the gloating, prideful scrawling of the text in blood on the wall ever more bitter, as the killer mocks your incompetence whilst confidently finishing their horrific act. Although this crime is entirely fictional, with no events based on any truth in our reality, the story was widely believed across American campuses in the mid to late 90s. It is a constant theme in these cautionary tales about the young away from the comfort of their family home. They are consistent reminders of how strange it is to step into the chaos of life by yourself. We feel old and mature enough to handle the big wide world out there. But even the most confident of us will share that anxiety that sneaks through the cracks of the excitement as the new world is suddenly thrust upon us. We believe ourselves to be prepared, but the nerves remain. These nerves are healthy and perfectly reasonable. And it would be strange not to feel anything about the prospect of your entire life changing, now having to fend for yourself entirely as you step out into the world of work and college. Throughout its long life, the story has factors that are consistent throughout, everlasting aspects to the tale. The first is the writing on the wall. It is almost always there, whether in blood or lipstick, adding the big theatrical set piece to the finale. It is this imagery that burns the story into our skulls. The second is the haunting notion that the killer's eyes were watching her enter the room, thus leading to a mystery of why she was left to survive. We are all aware that a violent crime could occur on any day. Nobody that has ever been attacked in the dark out of the blue has ever expected it to happen. We are all too familiar with the prospect that we are vulnerable in such a dangerous world, which proves to be so dark and dangerous the more we read and understand the purposely chosen, shocking news segments on TV and online. The reason these urban legends slowly fade away, only to appear again with full force in a boomerang-like fashion, is simply down to the anxieties of that time, matching them with whatever tale catches onto our fears. In today's world of unrest and divisiveness amongst us all, it is no wonder urban legends are reappearing in the world once again. If you're still with me, then I know you share the same passion for folklore and urban legends that drives this show. But to keep bringing you these stories, I need your help. Every season comes to life with the incredible support of listeners like you on Patreon. For just £3 a month, less than the price of a small coffee, you can help ensure that this show continues to thrive, with shorter breaks between seasons and even more content available. But that's not all. As a Patreon subscriber, you'll unlock exclusive perks like access to our bonus series, Modern Myths, where we dive into lesser-known but equally captivating tales like the Hodag, Black-Eyed Children, the Dark Watchers, and many more. You'll gain instant access to our entire library of bonus content the moment you join, with new chapters coming each season. You'll also get a behind-the-scenes look at how the show is made, discounts on merchandise, and an invitation to our private group chat, where you can connect with me directly and share your love for urban legends with a community of like-minded enthusiasts. Plus, as a special treat, I randomly select patrons to feature in upcoming stories, so you might find yourself becoming part of the very legends we explore. Supporting us on Patreon isn't just about subscribing. It's about joining a team dedicated to preserving and expanding on our collection of folklore. Your contribution directly fuels the research, production, and growth of the show, helping us continue this incredible journey together. So, if you're ready to take the next step and become an integral part of the Urban Legends community, head over to our Patreon page via the link in our show notes and choose the paid subscription. I'm looking forward to seeing you there, where we can keep these tales alive. And now, back to the legend. Mostly circulated across college grounds for the past few decades, the story varies from bone-chillingly horrifying to downright eerie, with its core staying very much the same. In its simplest iteration, a girl walks back to her home to get her books and hygiene products from her room before heading over to her boyfriend's for the night. This reason varies from a sleepover at a lover's to a party to a library where she is up late revising. When she returns, she enters the darkness, realizing her friend is asleep and decides to keep the light out. She stumbles around the room in the dark, clumsily gathering her things before finally leaving, gently closing the door behind her. She spends a lovely night out, but when she returns to her room the following day, she finds the building swarming with police. Confused, she approaches an officer and explains that she lived there. It's only when she tells him what room number she is in that his face changes, asking her to follow him inside. She is escorted into the building and up to her room, where she finds the bloodied sheets on her roommate's bed, with the blood-soaked writing on the wall that reads, "Aren't you glad you didn't turn on the lights?" It is then she realizes that her roommate was being murdered at the same time she was there to gather her things. In these stories, the killer is never seen or revealed, treated more as a shadowy phantom, an almost supernatural figure that manages to blend through the darkness without a sound. On a more realistic note, it would be hard for the killer to write on the wall in such darkness as, logically, if it was too dark for them to be seen, it was also too dark for him to see the wall. There is also the case that if somebody was being murdered on a bed, there would at the very least be the small sounds of the creaks on the mattress as the victim struggled in some way. This was covered in the 90s adaptation of this story featured in the film Urban Legend. In that, the protagonist mistook the murder for her frivolous roommate having sex with no regard to her comfort or privacy, a character trait that was set up earlier in the narrative. In these stories, though, it seems strange that murder could occur so close to somebody already trying so hard to be quiet. But when you break down most urban legends, the cracks in the logic begin to appear and grow the deeper inside you get. Another version of the tale tells the story of two roommates who have decided to stay in their college dorms over the holiday breaks in North America. One night, one of the two girls goes out on a date, whilst the other uses the time to pamper herself before turning in for an early night. In this story version, we stay with our sleeping friend as she slumbers away peacefully. But later in the night, she is awakened by the sounds of gurgling and scratching at their dormitory door from the hallway outside. The sounds were monstrous, eerie, and unnerving, almost like a creature was trying to scratch its way inside, occasionally thudding against the door's wood weakly. Finally, the girl gets up and walks to the door, locking it closed to ensure that whatever it was outside could not get in. She climbs back into bed and cowers in the corner, waiting for whatever it is to go away in her fear. It is not until the sun comes up the following day and the banging, scratching, and gurgling has stopped that she finally decides to step out into the hall. But when she does, she is greeted by the sight of the bloodied corpse of her roommate against the wall. Her throat had been slit and she had bled to death in the hallway whilst clambering to get her attention. Although this and other variations of the story have been widely believed over time, I see it more of a cautionary tale. To be cautious when we are alone at night. To be careful with whom you invite into your home. And more importantly, to always lock your doors. This modern folklore reminds us to heed caution, to make us feel unsettled as we hear it around the campfire embers, to remind us of the darkness out there, and to make the listener's skin crawl and blood run cold. Just like many of our favorite darker urban legends tend to do.
Urban Legends is researched, written and produced by Luke Mordew. Original score by Billy Jupp, with additional sounds from storyblocks.com. If you like what you heard and want to hear more, click subscribe on your chosen podcast provider and delve into the mysteries of our previous and future chapters. To find more, including merchandise, video content, images, and more, visit urbanlegendsfolklore.com. If you have more information or a correction on something mentioned in this chapter, please get in touch through our website. We aim to ensure that all information provided is accurate and up to date, and this remains a top priority. If you want to support the show, receive early access, and have more of a say in what we do, then become a patron by clicking the link in our show notes. For these chapters in video format, simply search Urban Legends Folklore on YouTube. Follow us on TikTok, Instagram, and Threads, and join our Facebook group by searching Urban Legends Folklore.